My wife yelled, "You're useless. I deserve someone better." I said, "You do." Then I handed her divorce papers. 2 weeks later, she was pleading to talk. I, 34 am, never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd walk away from a marriage without looking back, but life has a way of surprising you. The night everything changed started like any other evening in our increasingly cold household. We'd been married for 7 years, and somewhere along the way, the woman I'd fallen in love with had transformed into someone I barely recognized. The yelling started over something trivial. I'd forgotten to pick up her dry cleaning because I'd been working late on a project that would determine whether my startup survived another quarter. She stood in our kitchen, face flushed with anger, and unleashed a torrent of words I'd heard variations of countless times before. I was useless. I was a failure. I didn't make enough money. I didn't give her the life she deserved. Her friends' husbands were more successful, more attentive, more everything. And then came the line that changed everything. She screamed that she deserved someone better than me. I looked at her for a long moment. Something inside me that had been bending for years finally snapped, but not with anger. With clarity. I told her she was absolutely right. She did deserve someone better. And I deserved someone who actually wanted to be with me. The confusion on her face would have been comical in any other context. She'd expected me to apologize, to grovel, to promise to do better like I always did. Instead, I walked to my study and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying in my briefcase for 3 days. The divorce papers my lawyer had prepared after the last blow-up, when she'd told me she was embarrassed to introduce me to her work colleagues. I handed them to her and told her I'd already signed my portion. My lawyer would be in touch. Then I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and left for the hotel I'd already booked. Her voice followed me to the door, oscillating between disbelief and rage. She wanted to know if I was serious, if I'd lost my mind. How dare I embarrass her like this? I didn't respond. The time for words had passed. The first week was surreal. I stayed at the hotel and threw myself into work with a focus I hadn't managed in years. Funny how much energy you have when you're not walking on eggshells in your own home. My business partner noticed the change immediately and asked if everything was okay. I gave him the abbreviated version, and he just nodded and told me to take whatever time I needed. My lawyer called on day 3. She'd received the papers and wanted to contest everything. She was demanding the house, half my business, alimony, and a list of other things that would have crippled me financially. My lawyer asked if I wanted to fight it. I told him to offer her the house and a reasonable settlement, but the business was non-negotiable. I'd started it before we met, and I'd be damned if years of my work became her consolation prize. By the end of week 1, I'd moved into a small furnished apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and the silence was golden. No criticism, no complaints, no constant reminders of my inadequacy. I ordered takeout, worked until midnight, and slept better than I had in months. She tried calling multiple times that week. I didn't answer. Every message was some variation of the same theme. We needed to talk. I was being rash. Marriage was about working through problems. I deleted them without listening to the full recordings. Week 2 brought an interesting development. My lawyer called with news that she'd hired a prominent divorce attorney known for being aggressive. They were preparing to fight dirty, digging into my finances and business dealings looking for anything they could use. My lawyer seemed concerned, but I told him to let them look. I'd built my business legitimately, kept clean books, and had nothing to hide. What I didn't tell my lawyer was that I'd spent the previous year documenting everything. Every insult, every public humiliation, every time she'd belittled me in front of friends and family. I had recordings, text messages, emails. I'd started keeping records after she'd screamed at me during my mother's funeral reception, telling me I was embarrassing her by being too emotional. That was the day I realized the marriage was over, even if it took me another year to accept it. My business partner and I also landed the contract we'd been chasing for 6 months. It was a game changer, the kind of deal that would triple our revenue and establish us as serious players in our industry. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, she'd complained about money, about my business being a waste of time, about how I should get a real job. Now, just as I was walking away, everything was finally coming together. Around day 10, she showed up at my apartment. The building had security, so she couldn't get up, but she waited in the lobby until I came home. She looked different. The armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup was gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back simply. She asked if we could talk, said she'd been thinking about everything, that maybe she'd been too harsh. I told her through the intercom that anything she wanted to say could go through our lawyers. She insisted it wasn't about the divorce, that she just wanted to understand what had happened to us. I pointed out that what happened was 7 years of her treating me like an inconvenience she was stuck with, and I was done being her emotional punching bag. She started crying, saying she never meant to hurt me, that she was stressed at work and took it out on me unfairly. I asked her if she remembered the night she told her friends at dinner that marrying me was the biggest mistake of her life, while I sat right there next to her. She went quiet. I told her to go home and ended the call. The next day, her mother called me. We'd always had a decent relationship, and I felt bad about the position this put her in. She asked me to reconsider, said her daughter was devastated, that every marriage went through rough patches. I explained, as gently as I could, that this wasn't a rough patch. This was years of systematic emotional abuse that I'd finally found the strength to walk away from. Her mother was quiet for a moment, then asked if there was someone else. The question didn't surprise me. In her world, men didn't leave marriages unless they had another woman lined up. I assured her there was no one else, that I just wanted peace and the chance to build a life that didn't make me feel worthless. By the end of week 2, the harassment escalated. She was calling and texting constantly, showing up at my apartment at odd hours, even appearing at my office building during lunch. Her messages swung wildly between apologetic and accusatory. One text would say she understood she'd made mistakes and wanted to work on things. The next would call me a coward for running away instead of fighting for our marriage. I documented everything and forwarded it to my lawyer. He agreed it was concerning and suggested we might need to consider a restraining order if it continued. I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but I was prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect the boundaries I'd finally managed to set. My friends started reaching out during this period. Some were supportive, having witnessed her treatment of me over the years. Others seemed confused, suggesting I was overreacting or being too harsh. One friend told me that all wives complained about their husbands, that it was just how marriage worked. I asked him if his wife had ever told him she was ashamed to be seen with him in public. He didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, I felt lighter than I had in years. Every day, without her constant criticism, felt like coming up for air after being underwater. I started going to the gym again, something I'd stopped doing because she'd made snide comments about me caring more about my appearance than our marriage. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from because she didn't like them. I remembered what it felt like to be myself. Update 1. 3 weeks after I'd handed her those papers, things took an unexpected turn. I was working late at the office when my business partner told me someone was asking for me in the lobby. My stomach sank, assuming it was her again, but security wouldn't have let her up. It was her father. He was a man I'd always respected, a successful businessman himself who'd built his company from scratch. We'd had good conversations over the years about entrepreneurship and business strategy. He asked if we could talk somewhere private, and I led him to our small conference room. He got straight to the point. His daughter had told him her version of events, painting herself as the victim of my sudden and unexplained abandonment. But he'd been married for 35 years, and he wasn't naive. He wanted to hear my side. I laid it out for him, not with anger or spite, just facts. The constant criticism, the public humiliation, the way she'd systematically worked to destroy my confidence over the years. I told him about the night of my mother's funeral and the dinner where she'd called marrying me her biggest mistake. I mentioned the recordings and messages I'd kept. His face grew progressively darker as I spoke. When I finished, he sat back and was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me something that surprised me. He said he'd seen the signs, but had hoped he was wrong. He'd noticed how she spoke to me at family gatherings and had mentioned it to his wife, who'd brushed it off as normal marital friction. He apologized for not saying something sooner and told me he didn't blame me for leaving. Then he said something that stuck with me. He'd built his business and his fortune to give his children a comfortable life, but somewhere along the way, his daughter had started measuring people by their bank accounts rather than their character. He took responsibility for that. Before he left, he shook my hand and told me that regardless of what happened with the divorce, he respected my decision and wished me well. He also mentioned that he wouldn't be supporting her legal attempts to take my business. She was an adult and would need to figure out her own path forward. That conversation meant more to me than he probably realized. Update 2. Week 4 brought the mediation session our lawyers had arranged. I arrived at the law office early, dressed in a suit, prepared for battle. She arrived late, with her aggressive attorney in tow, looking like she'd barely slept. The mediation started with her lawyer laying out their demands. They wanted the house, 60% of my business assets, 5 years of alimony, and half of my savings. It was an absurd opening bid, clearly designed to shock me into a worse settlement. My lawyer countered with our offer. She could have the house and a reasonable cash settlement equivalent to about 18 months of her current salary. Nothing from the business, no ongoing alimony since we had no children and she had a well-paying job of her own. Her lawyer scoffed and said we were being unrealistic. That's when my lawyer produced the first batch of documentation. Text messages, emails, and yes, recordings of her verbal abuse. He explained calmly that if this went to court, we'd be making the case that she'd created a hostile environment throughout the marriage and that any settlement should reflect that reality. The color drained from her face as my lawyer played one particularly damning recording. It was from 8 months ago, when she'd told me that if I was going to be a failure, the least I could do was have the decency to fail quietly and not embarrass her in front of her colleagues. The mediator, who'd been neutral up to that point, looked uncomfortable. Her lawyer called for a private conference, and they left the room. When they came back 30 minutes later, the demands had been substantially reduced. We didn't reach an agreement that day, but the tone had shifted. Her lawyer was no longer aggressive, now focused on damage control. My lawyer later told me they were probably worried about what a judge might do if they heard those recordings. But the real shock came that evening. She called from a number I didn't recognize, so I answered thinking it might be work-related. Her voice was small, nothing like the confident, critical tone I'd lived with for years. She asked if we could meet, just the two of us, without lawyers. Against my better judgment and my lawyer's advice, I agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral location the next afternoon. She arrived looking genuinely broken. Gone was the woman who'd spent years making me feel small. In her place was someone who seemed lost. She started by apologizing, not the surface-level apology she'd attempted before, but something that seemed to come from genuine reflection. She told me she'd been in therapy since I left, something her father had insisted on. Her therapist had helped her see patterns she'd been blind to, ways she'd been taking out her own insecurities and fears on me. She recognized now that she'd been emotionally abusive, and she was ashamed. I listened without interrupting. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the time we'd wasted, sad for the people we'd become in that toxic dynamic. She asked if there was any chance I'd consider couples therapy, trying to rebuild what we'd had. I told her honestly that what we'd had wasn't worth rebuilding. It had been broken from the start, two people who wanted different things from life and lacked the communication skills to bridge that gap. She cried then, really cried, and asked what she could do to make this right. I told her the truth. She could sign the divorce papers, accept the settlement we'd offered, and use this as an opportunity to become the person she wanted to be. We couldn't do that together, the damage was too deep, but she could do it for herself and her future relationships. Update 3. 6 weeks after I'd left, the divorce was finalized. She'd accepted our settlement offer, and we divided everything as cleanly as possible. She kept the house and got a cash payout that was fair if not generous. I kept my business and my freedom. The day the papers were finalized, I felt a mixture of relief and melancholy. 7 years of my life were officially over, reduced to legal documents and property settlements. But I also felt hopeful in a way I hadn't in years. My business continued to thrive. The contract we'd landed had opened doors to other opportunities, and we were hiring our first employees. My business partner joked that divorce was the best business decision I'd ever made, though he quickly apologized when he saw my face. I started dating someone about 8 weeks after the divorce was final. She was different from my ex in every way that mattered. She was kind, supportive, and secure enough in herself that she didn't need to diminish others to feel good. We took things slowly, both of us gun-shy from previous relationships, but it felt healthy and real. My ex reached out one final time, 3 months after everything was finalized. She'd moved out of state for a new job opportunity and wanted me to know she was working on herself. She thanked me for setting boundaries and said that leaving her was probably the kindest thing I could have done, even if it hadn't felt like it at the time. I wished her well and meant it. I didn't hate her. Hate requires energy and emotional investment I no longer had to spare. She was just someone I used to know, someone who taught me valuable lessons about self-worth and the importance of walking away from situations that diminish you. Looking back, the moment I handed her those divorce papers was the moment I started reclaiming my life. She'd told me I was useless, that she deserved better. She was half right. She did deserve better, but so did I. And sometimes the best revenge isn't some elaborate scheme or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply choosing yourself, building a life that makes you happy, and refusing to settle for being someone's emotional punching bag. I'm not the same person I was in that marriage. I'm stronger, more confident, more certain of my worth. And if I ever find myself in a relationship that starts to feel like that again, I'll have the wisdom to walk away sooner. That's the real victory. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.